Welcome to episode 4 of the Select Characters podcast, a podcast about video games. My name is Chris, I'll be your host, and I'm joined as always by my two good friends. The first one is the guy with the most relaxed voice in the universe, Samuel. How are you doing?
What's up? Doing great.
What's up? My second one, is it a bird? Is it a plane? It's Enrique. Hi, Enrique.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Yes. So, how you guys doing?
Good, man.
Doing good.
Yeah, looking forward to the podcast?
So much. I'm fired up this week, man.
Some good topics today, I think.
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
All right, love the enthusiasm. All right, well, now that we've got the introductions out of the way, let's move on to our first segment. So, what have you guys been playing? Who wants to go first?
Well, I went first last week, so I think Enrique should do it.
Fair enough. I've actually been splitting my time between a little bit of Monster Hunter because it's always a fun go-to game. And I actually picked up Chroma Squad because Sam talking about it a few weeks ago kind of got me in the mood for it, and it's actually surprisingly fun. I've been having a blast.
Yeah, it's that Power Ranger game, right?
Yeah, which is actually I'm a little disappointed because I was playing another game beforehand that really left a sour taste in my mouth, which was, I think, Gods Will Be Watching.
I've heard about that. It's a story kind of adventure game, right?
Yes and no. When you read about it, it kind of pitches it like it's going to be a really in-depth kind of consequence management type game where, you know, you're part of some terrorist resistance movement, and you have to make like these really deep choices in terms of like hostages, who gets to live and die, and like you're stranded on the planet, and it sounds really, really cool. But all it amounts to is actually just a very shallow resource management game, and it's really disappointing because, you know, you're kind of expecting this really in-depth story and having to kind of like weigh the consciousness of your decisions and, you know, like the consequences, but it really doesn't do any of that.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing. It's just one of those games where, you know, it's really easy to min-max, and you just know, all right, do this motion, do this action, do this motion, and rinse and repeat, and then get through the level.
Wasn't it advertised as such?
No. Like I said, like when you read about it, it really comes off like it's going to be a very narrative-intensive game where, you know, like every little, I guess, decision you make affects the consequences, but I guess it's more in regards to your resource management. That's it.
That's what I thought, at least when I looked at the store page.
Yeah, so it was a little disappointing. It was just like a generic resource management game and, you know, kind of lackluster. But Chroma Squad, on the other hand, is super awesome. It's very fun because it's got that whole Power Rangers lightheartedness to it, and the combat mechanics aren't too deep, but they're fun. It's just a nice little tactics distraction game.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a palate cleanser.
I've got my eyes on it. All right.
I have not been playing anything specific. I've been dibbling and dabbling here and there, trying to sink my teeth into something. I guess I sort of get the feeling that The Witcher 3 is going to come out, and that's what I'm going to bite on. So I've just been dipping my toes in and out of a few things here and there. A little bit of Invisible Ink, mainly this week, which came out. It's a procedurally generated stealth turn-based game where you've got your spies and you kind of break into all these high-tech facilities and stuff. That game's pretty groovy. Right. Overall, the highlight of my week, though, was I had some family come over, and they not only remembered but requested by name to play a game called Hidden in Plain Sight. Mm-hmm. Have you guys ever played that?
No.
So, Hidden in Plain Sight, I first played on the Xbox maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It's developed by a guy named Adam Sprague, and I don't think he ever made another game. I think it's just this one. I tried to verify that, so I checked his Twitter, and it's just a bunch of pictures of rock balancing, which I guess that's a pretty cool hobby, but when you know that he's the guy who made Hidden in Plain Sight, it's like watching pictures of the Library of Alexandria burning. But if you can get 4 people in a room with controllers, I'd highly recommend it. The general gist, I'm not sure how well it'll pitch, but it's a game with 5 modes, and the 2 that we normally play are called Death Race and Ninja Party, of which my favorite is Death Race. So left-hand side of the screen, you have a stack from top to bottom of maybe 50 different characters. And you've got wizards and skeletons and golems, just all kinds of crazy stuff. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you have a finish line. The thing is, you don't know which person you are. So A button walks you forward and Y button runs you forward. The NPCs all move just like players move, but they can't run. And the final little cherry on top of that is that everybody also has a crosshair with 1 bullet. So your goal is to get to the finish line before everybody else, but you also can't really let on to the fact that you're an actual player.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really good, man. If you get 4 people, I really, really recommend it. But you got to kind of temper your consumption of it, you know what I mean? Like only play it for a little bit because obviously this guy's not going to make anything else. And
how old's this game?
It came out, I want to say 2011 because that's where I first played it, like Xbox indie games. And a PC version came out not too long ago. And the other mode I really like is called Ninja Party, which is a screen with 5 statues on it and maybe 50 different identical ninjas.
Jeez.
And that's the same thing. Like the first thing you have to do is figure out which one you are, and then you can either win by punching everybody else to death or by touching all the statues. And so every time you touch a statue, it makes a noise like a ding. So you have you and 3 other people running around, and you touch the statues and it dings. So you kind of want to touch the statue at the same time as one of the NPCs so that you can fool the other people playing with you to kind of throw a punch, because the computer doesn't throw punches. So that you can then know who they are and kind of track them down. There's a couple more modes in there that are pretty good, but that game overall is just such a delight to play.
It sounds awesome, actually.
Yeah, man.
Is this strictly like LAN, like online or couch co-op?
Couch co-op, that's it, that's all. So if you can get 4 controllers and the number of people in your living room, I cannot recommend it enough. And it was really cool that they came over and actually remembered playing this with me like a couple years ago, and we got to break it out again.
I'm gonna look that up after we're done recording the podcast, because it sounds
it's
awesome.
an immense amount of fun. It's one of my favorite games, but like I said, you gotta measure your consumption of it because there's not more of that coming. But it's so unique and it's just absolutely amazing. I hope that guy gets back to work and makes something else.
Yeah. It sounds like he's pretty good at making games, or at least coming up with interesting concepts.
Maybe that was like his magnum opus and he's just done.
Yeah, it could be, but man, that death race is so good. Because you only get 1 bullet, so you try to lure out other people's bullets, but you can't run because then, that gives away the fact that you're a player. Then you start, like, the whole metagame stuff just takes off. Like, you start hovering your crosshairs over your own dude so that people, aren't paying attention, and you can just kind of creep forward, and then you see one person get ahead of everybody, but the computer's moving at the same time, and it's just this real delicate balance. It's absolutely amazing.
Awesome. All right, anything else?
That's about it, man.
All right, then I'll just tell you what I've been playing. I've been jumping back into Heroes of the Storm because Killfast got released as a new character. Ended up not really playing him, but that game is becoming exceedingly more polished, and it's supposed to be coming out in about 2 to 3 weeks, I want to say. And I'm psyched for it to come out. When the floodgates open, a lot more people are going to come in. And it's got to be wild, man. That game is just an insane amount of fun.
I got into I think I bought the Founders Pack. I played it for a little while. It seemed really good. And I thought I'd just give it some more time to stew, kind of come out full release maybe later.
Yeah, it's a really cool game. It's like the bar for entry is a lot lower than in games like, for instance, Dota 2. It's a lot simpler like that. But I don't know, it's just a whole lot more fun, I think. There's objectives on every map, and the characters are all from games I played when I was a kid. So, it's all the characters are instantly recognizable, and it's just really cool to see Arthas fight alongside Jaina and alongside Tychus. It's just cool. I love it.
Yeah,
I'll say this. I love how Blizzard can take a pretty in-depth concept and kind of water it down to its bare essentials.
Yeah, they're really good at that. They did the same with Hearthstone, which is derivative of Magic the Gathering.
Oh, yeah.
I believe. Yeah. They seem to be really good at doing just that. But, their games are just fun. They're always a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's the point. They make games like you make stock, you just let it boil until all the water boils off, and then what you have left is this concentrated sort of nugget, like they get rid of all the excess and just polish it like crazy.
Yeah.
And some people say, oh, that's casual or that's simple or whatever, but Heroes of the Storm is what I'm looking for in a MOBA,
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't need to be hardcore in order for it to be good.
Right, exactly.
I've also noticed that the community is a little bit more welcoming as well.
Maybe in America. Not in Europe. No, it's always everyone else's fault on the team except yours. The community can get pretty terrible, and there's a lot because I'm in Europe, there's a lot of different countries with different languages.
Okay.
And for some reason, Russian people get lumped in with European people, and Russian people tend to not be all that great at English, so you often get matched with Russian people who don't speak English. So it's kind of hard to coordinate a team when 2 or 3 people in your team don't know how to speak English.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's a MOBA. People who play MOBAs tend to be pretty toxic.
Yeah,
but that's just my experience.
That's the problem, because those games are really amazing. Like, almost nothing can touch how fun a MOBA is when you have 10 people who all really click and are all actually playing a good game, but like one of those people goes off and that's it, you know?
Yeah. It's just something that you can't really deal with. Like, the only way you can deal with that is to mute people, but you're still in a team with those people. You have to communicate in order to win, especially when you're playing competitively. So, but they'll probably come up with something like the tribunal that you have in League of Legends, where you can report people and then you'll be judged by a jury of your peers, which seems to work well for that game. But let's see, anything else that I've been playing this week? That was it, actually. So yeah, want to jump into the meat and bones?
Ready to go, man. Let's do it.
Let's go for it.
Let's do it. So in light of recent surges in popularity for esports, I thought we discuss that, because it seems to be a more prevalent thing in gaming nowadays than it was, well, say 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And I don't know, it's becoming a very important part of gaming, what with the rise to prominence from Twitch and stuff like that.
Yeah.
People seem to tune in all the time to watch their favorite players play competitively. And I'm kind of wondering, like, where is it going from here?
That's a great question. And you're right. I think that the more of the rise in esports can be attributed to just accessibility than basically anything else, you know? Like, it's easier to get access to it and be able to watch that stuff. And as a business model, I think it's really strange because it's fueled by public interest in a world where there's always something new trying to come along to be the next game that everybody's paying attention to. And so for these big tournaments and these interesting competitions, they need prize money. But if nobody's watching, then, you know, what are they going to be able to pay out? Like, you want to be competitive in a game where there are always other people trying to make new and better ones. Like, nobody's making a new football. You know, there's not 8 soccers coming out every year. It's just a really strange environment to try to do those things. And I think at least up until now, people are trying to apply the traditional models of monetizing sports.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to be as successful in something that is by its nature sort of transitory. It's
becoming more and more accepted as a pastime as well. I mean, Heroes of the Storm has been on ESPN, for God's sake, which used to be a channel solely dedicated to physical sports.
I mean, technically it's on ESPN too, but I see your point.
It's still a network that up until now was dedicated solely to stuff like football, American football, basketball, stuff like that. And now people are tuning in to watch people play Heroes of the Storm and League of Legends.
I think that's pretty cool.
It is.
I think that anything a person can do, you know, eventually you're going to have somebody doing that thing and then somebody else doing that thing, and you want to know who can do it better. And so I think that's great. I think it is really cool, actually. And I hope that it gets bigger, but it's how do you build the infrastructure for that stuff, you know? Games have already gone up and fallen down.
I mean, but take it a step further. You even have the collegiate scene starting to chip in with, I think it was Robert Morris University in Chicago that they announced that they were going to actually start giving scholarships for esports. And then I think University of Pikeville in Kentucky kind of added in, and they started giving out scholarships as well. And then you have the U.S. government recognizing visas, I think Dota or StarCraft players as actual athletes for visa purposes, so they can come to the U.S. and compete. So, I mean, at least everything on the peripheral is kind of definitely setting up to help support it.
And the whole thing with the visas sort of started up the argument, or the discussion more like, whether esports are actual sports or not. And I don't really know if that really matters in the end.
No. Yeah, I don't think so. Of course they're sports, right? Isn't a sport just anything you can do competitively against another person?
Yeah, I think so.
I think some people have the argument that, like, the thing that sets quote-unquote sports apart is that it has to be a physical activity. But, you know, like you said, that opens up a whole manner of interpretation. Like, what do you consider quote-unquote physical activity? You know, because, I mean, it takes an extraordinary amount of hand-eye coordination for, you know, mobile players to the point where even, I think, the age of falling out is around 26, 27, where, you know, like veteran players start retiring because they can't keep up with like younger players. So there is definitely that physical aspect to it.
I think that people are having trouble with accepting esports as an actual sport because of the stigma that still surrounds video games up to a certain point.
Right.
Doesn't everybody agree that target shooting is a sport?
And people agree that chess is a sport as well.
People agree that driving in a circle is a sport.
NASCAR.
Well, no, I think we're getting too caught up in semantics. I think at the end of the day, what's important is it entertaining to watch, because that's really what sports come down to. You know, is it something the audience wants to engage in? And obviously, there is a huge outcry for the audience for these esports. Otherwise, they wouldn't be getting so much national attention on television.
There used to be a variant on the Olympic Games that was called the World Cyber Games, I want to say. Mm-hmm. That doesn't really exist anymore. They stopped the event in 2014. But it's great that there was something like that for a number of years, and the prize pools were immense. So it definitely seems to be a legitimate thing now. I mean, what was the prize pool for the latest League of Legends tournament? Was it like 1 million or something like that?
Yeah, it was up there, man.
And how many people tuned into that? I think that was around the 30, 40 million people range.
I think they averaged that being, I think, one of the highest televised events in recent history.
Yeah.
But actually, going back to Sam's point, because he brought up a really interesting question, because I don't think it's really worth debating the legitimacy of esports, because, you know, I think we're all in agreement that, hey, you know, it's obviously something the audience wants and it has a following, so it should definitely be considered legitimate. But I think it's more interesting to see how it's going to evolve and what kind of games take it to, you know, to make it professional, quote unquote. Because, like he said, we have one football, we have one baseball. You don't see any, you know, people trying to recreate another version of the game.
Actively. You know what I mean? Like actively trying to make a better one.
Yeah, actively.
And if they do, if you envision the scenario where something like Dota comes out that's better in every conceivable way, which is low probability but not impossible, then what?
Yeah, because, you know, right now it's, what is it? You have League of Legends, Dota 2, Heroes of the Storm is quickly picking up steam. Smite's another one that recently came on. That's picking up a lot of steam. Blizzard's coming out with Overwatch, and that looks like it's going to be along the same kind of competitive line. So, I mean, it's really interesting seeing all these games coming out trying to beat each other, but at the same time trying to kind of stand on their own. You know, it's like flipping to the channels and seeing like 10 different versions of football, and, you know, you're kind of deciding which one do I want to follow.
And some games are even marketed now as fully competitive games made specifically for the competitive scene and esports, which I think is quite interesting, that it's a selling point nowadays. Like a couple of years back, competitive multiplayer were an afterthought, just something to keep people interested in playing the game after they finish the storyline. But now they seem to be the focus of a lot of games. Battlefield is marketed as a competitive game now. Nobody really cares about the story. Same with Call of Duty.
Yeah. Well, they have to also be spectatable, and I think generally maybe most FPSs don't pass that bar. I think that the isometric perspective of MOBAs lends itself a lot to being more broadcastable, and Hearthstone especially is, I mean, the ultimate broadcastable esport, because it gives the commentators time to analyze plays and talk over it, you know, without things happening so rapidly that they can't keep up.
You know what I find a really interesting parallel between, I guess, real sports and esports? The advent of gambling on the sports. Because, you know, with Counter-Strike and other games and Dota, you see a lot of behind-the-scenes player gambling on matches.
Right.
So it's kind of really interesting to see the parallels between, you know, that kind of atmosphere that's developing now versus the one that's kind of, you know, that's been going on in the world of real sports for a while.
In a way
now.
that legitimizes it even more, because if you can bet money on it, right? Like it's got to be the real deal.
Yeah. I mean, if people are getting that invested to a point where like they'll actually, you know, betting real life money on it, I mean, like you said, it definitely adds a bit more to the legitimacy of it.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe in 5 years or something like that, games will get broadcasted on live TV during prime time.
I'm kind of curious though, like I guess, are we ever going to reach a point where there's just going to be a normalized competitive game that, you know, that's your go-to, like the way we have American football that's football, or, you know, you have rugby and there's one rugby and that's what you watch? Isn't
StarCraft already at that level?
Maybe?
It is, but I feel like StarCraft is definitely very regional based, though. Because at least, I mean, maybe just because I don't have a lot of experience on it, but I don't see a lot of U.S. players who are as fervent of following in the U.S. as there is like overseas. The US definitely has it for MOBA games like League of Legends and Dota 2, but the StarCraft scene is definitely more, I'd say, like an Asian market.
Well, Hearthstone and Counter-Strike, those two things are very popular in the West, especially Hearthstone.
Yes.
Look at how quickly that game rose to prominence after it got released. It's a staple of many tournaments now.
That's true. I mean, to the point where it's getting, new cards that get released get media coverage because of their validity in gaming or how overpowered certain cards are and everything like that. It's really interesting.
And that's kind of a bummer, too, though, because in order to be a part of esports, the development sort of gets staggered or slowed down or moved around. Like, the developers can't, if they're part of some giant esport, they can't really just push patches at their own pace anymore because there's so many huge money competitions relying on the game. So I guess maybe you have tournaments that run older versions or something, but that interaction between the development team and the tournament organizers and promoters and esports teams, I think that that's one of the things that needs to be smoothed out.
Right.
Like, there's a whole lot of problems to solve. Like, overall, I think everybody thinks it's a good thing and hope it gets even better, but there's some bumps that are going to be in this road, and I think that's one of them, as well as the fact that people, I mean, this is why you see games, get discounted by 50% 6 months after release. Like, people don't generally keep playing games for that long of a time, and the esports you're going to watch are generally a game that you are playing that you want to see a professional play. And so as the population moves and shift, I'm curious to see how this all pans out.
Do you think esports is going to kind of have a unique niche in, I guess, like the sports entertainment industry, considering how transitory it is?
Oh, yeah. It's already a very specific niche.
I think it could. I mean, I hope it does. But you would need to see gaming become a lot more ubiquitous than it is now, but year after year, it becomes more and more prevalent and a common part of people's lives. We're just not quite there exactly yet, because to put something on TV, you kind of make the assumption that somebody flicking through the channels can have a basic understanding of what they're about to see, so that they'll stop and watch it. And so, at least for esports, that's still kind of out of the grasp of the person who's flipping cable channels, Even a person who barely knows what football is might stop and watch it, because they have kind of a general idea. But a lot of that could come down to commentators and things like that,
Like, I guess I'm just still caught up on what you said about, how there is no one esport that kind of like, I guess, encompasses what it's supposed to be. You have so many different genres and different games of it that it's just kind of interesting. I'm wondering where this whole sphere is going to evolve into, or whether it's just going to kind of stay this transitive thing that's always going to be changing, or if it's ever going to stable out.
It doesn't have to be standardized. I mean, look for instance at the Olympic Games. There's a whole lot of different types of disciplines, I think you call them. Rules they don't get radically changed, but they do get changed to accommodate like a new generation of athletes or stuff like that. And it could be the same for esports.
It's a series of environments of rapid fire decision making, I suppose. But I don't think that there will be anything that really settles in and everybody says, this is the computer game that we're going to play forever. I think that eventually Dota 2 is going to taper off, and that's, probably a long way down the line, but it's a thing that's going to happen. I think that what you'll see is that they'll be able to model that out, like the rise and fall of esports, because so much of it does depend on the audience. If you want to have those big paydays and that big media coverage, there needs to be a large audience to support that. But that's not the way that games in general work. Like, there's constant iteration and there's constant improvement, and things get better and become more interesting, It's a constantly shifting landscape, I guess. And so they have to find a way to capitalize that and ride the waves when they're high and then jump out when they're low.
Right.
I know from like a spectator standpoint, though, I think it makes them infinitely more interactive and interesting to watch than standard sports, because, like you said, it's constantly changing, and like nowhere else are you going to see a sport where the meta of it is so vastly different from 1 month to the next. You have your standard sports like football, baseball, rugby, soccer, and the rules are standard across the board. You might have different variations of them on the league and club levels, but overall the rules stay the same. And because of that, the way you play them will always remain the same. There's always the same gameplay, there's always the same tactics. You might find different variations, but it's always going to be a very standard cut and paste way of playing those sports.
Right.
But with esports, you have developers are constantly throwing out new characters, new levels, new designs, new mechanics, and you see the meta constantly shifting, and what's viable last week can suddenly be turned on its head, and completely new gameplay style is going to emerge within a few days, and it's just fascinating to see that evolve.
It will make it more interesting for the people who would like to watch it as well, because they can get involved in the discussions over the meta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the best parts about it.
Oh man, do you guys ever watch the BlizzCon, like the PvP tournaments?
Sometimes, yeah.
I think man, my mind is failing me right now, but I think it was 2 years ago, and it was a team that won, and the comp they had was like completely unviable at the time, and I cannot remember what it was. I just remember one of the players was a hunter, and I think the hunter combination was something that just hadn't been tried at that point because the meta said, "Hey, that's unviable." And they actually ended up winning the tournament. And it's really funny because when the announcer's kind of interviewing them, saying, "Hey, you guys had a really unorthodox gameplay style. What made you want to put a hunter in your 3-person team? Because this goes against the meta." And it's really funny because their response was like, "Oh, well, we wanted to play with our friend, and the hunter was the only class he could play, so we went with that."
So it's skill over meta.
Yeah, no, it was just really cool to see like how how quickly that can change.
It's a good underdog story.
Yeah. God, I'm gonna have to look up and post that in the details later, just because it's bothering me.
The other problem, at least as far as I see it, is how are you're fans of the game, but how would I decide what team to be a fan of if I wanted to start following esports?
That's a good question, actually.
There's no regional distinctions, and there's no, the common elements that you would use. Like, if I want to watch football, great, like, this is the team I follow because that's the city or state I'm in, or because that's the team my dad liked, or whatever. If you just decide to pick up esports,
well, maybe in the next generation that will happen. You'll be a fan of that StarCraft team because your father was.
Yeah.
I think it still applies, at least on the individual level, because it's the same reason you pick specific players, because you like the way they play, you follow them through their history, you think they're good on their feet. I think it's the same way for the individual players, where you see them in matches, you like their personality, you like how they carry themselves, you like their appeal. So I think some of the same rules still apply.
That's what keeps people watching season after season, is being locked in with one specific team and saying, "I'm a fan of this team," and then tuning in every year to see how far they make it this time. Like, that's part of
it's also
part of the appeal, right, of watching sports on TV.
Yeah, but it's also difficult to have that regionalized kind of team setting because of how small the teams are. It's not like, you don't have 22 people to a team. You have teams of 4 or 5, and that's it.
We've come a long way since 1972, when Stanford University had a competition with the game Space War. Look where we are now, and look where we might be going.
It's exciting. Just wait till VR hits the scene. What if that's amazing? That could change the whole... Yeah.
Oh, man.
That could change not only the competition itself, but the way we watch it.
Oh, God, that would be amazing.
So it's exciting, and it's really cool, and it'll be really interesting to see where it goes.
Actually, a topic that I want to talk about right now is, I guess, piracy in video games, and more related to how companies handle them. Reason I bring this up is because, as Sam mentioned earlier, The Witcher 3 is coming out next week, and CD Projekt Red has actually been very vocal about how they deal with piracy and how they consider them more they have a more benevolent approach towards them. I think they recently released a statement saying that the PC version of The Witcher is going to have a day 1 patch. And with their announcement, they actually provided a link for anybody that did not obtain the game through them to be able to download it. That's really interesting because, for them, they don't really necessarily see people who pirate the game as enemies. They see them as just a customer to win over. And it's really interesting kind of how they have this rapport with quote-unquote pirates. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have companies like EA, Ubisoft, who tend to go for a more scorched earth policy in terms of piracy, where they have insane amounts of DRM through Origin, through Uplay. I'm just kind of really interested how these different companies have different perspective on pirates, and I'm kind of interested in seeing what your guys' outlook is on that.
I think that, and this might be preaching to the choir, but I think draconian DRM is bad for the end user, for the legit end user, because more often than not, it hampers their ability to play their game, play the game that they bought, that they paid good money for. I don't really think it's fair.
And I've never seen one last forever. Like, it always gets cracked eventually, right? So it's just
for sure.
They just do it to buy a little bit of time, maybe a few days, maybe a week, and just stem the tide and hope that that's enough of an inconvenience to get the pirates to purchase their game. But they're either going to wait, or those people weren't their customers anyway. So why do something that's going to hurt the legitimate customers?
Yeah, here's the thing with piracy, because most big publishers and devs, they talk about when people pirate our stuff, we lose money. But revenue was never truly lost if people pirate, because most pirates would never have paid for the product in the first place, like you said. But the problem with piracy, to me, is that it devalues a product. Sadly, we now have an entire generation of people who were brought up in a world where not paying for digital content is seen as logical instead of unethical. Right. And their concerns are made even more legitimate by draconian DRM, which pushes more people away than brings in.
I guess to bring in like the moral question on it, do you think there's ever a situation where piracy is justified?
No, I don't.
Because and I hate to admit this, but I've pirated a few games, and most recently one that I can off the top of my head is Far Cry 3. But I only pirated it after I had actually already bought it. And the reason I did so is because I was frustrated, because I think there was a time period where you couldn't even log in and play because of server issues with Uplay. And it's really frustrating because Far Cry 3 is a single-player game. So from the gamer standpoint, that just makes no sense. Why is there a server issue preventing me from playing my single-player game? So I went out and did what I had to do so I could enjoy the game that I had originally paid for. So I'm not saying that it's always like that, but
I didn't think about that one actually. Yeah, I do agree that in some cases, like if you've already paid for the content but you cannot access the content through no fault of your own, then yeah, you should get a working copy.
It's a strange environment, because everything online has been available in some way for free for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to put a game out with DRM that hurts legitimate customers, and it's going to get cracked eventually anyway, why not take the CD Projekt Red stance and get your good guy points while you can, and just hope that by doing that you create an audience who, when they do have disposable income, will then proceed to actually legitimately buy your game?
Well, that would be the ideal result, but like I said, those people will probably never buy your stuff in the first place because they can get it for free. I think that piracy is a service problem, first and foremost.
I'll agree with that, yeah.
Okay.
Because look at services in other industries. Look at Netflix, look at Spotify. People will gladly pay a monthly fee to get unlimited access to something. And then they would prefer to do that over getting a torrent and getting their stuff for free, because it's just easier to get it legitimately than it is to pirate it.
Exactly. They set the bar. All they have to do is just come in underneath the bar of inconvenience set by having to go to a torrent site, download it, feel a little bit guilty and also a little bit nervous about getting in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All they have to do is offer a service that comes in just beneath all that, like just a little bit more convenient and totally in the clear, and that's where everybody's going to go.
And we've seen it in the past that it actually works. It works with Steam as well. I used to pirate games when I had less money than I have now, but now I have Steam. It's just so easy to get the games I want. I just pay in the actual app. It downloads it automatically. It'll even download it on my PC via the phone app if I'm not home. It's just so much easier to just spend a bit of money for convenience than it is to look up a torrent, muck about with cracks and stuff like that.
I think it's really interesting. And a lot of it, when you look at the way these companies are handling it, it ties back to, I guess, their personal views on why the customer is pirating a game. I think with CD Projekt Red, a lot of them tend to have more, like I said, a more benevolent approach. They don't necessarily see people pirating the game as, the evil, kid behind his computer that doesn't want to pay for anything. They assume that there's whatever extenuating circumstances, there are people that still want to consume their content, but for whatever reason they cannot pay for it. And you can see by their attitude, when they released that statement with their, like the patch they were announcing, they even said, hey, if you can't, if you don't buy the game through us, but you still want to download the patch, here's a direct link to it. We do urge you that if you like what you see, please support the game. And it's great, but at the same time, you have to ask yourself, is that maybe a little bit of naivety on their behalf? Because there are those assholes that are just, pirating for the sake of pirating because they feel entitled that they shouldn't have to pay for something. And they can say all the justification they want, saying, oh, well, I want to see if the game's going to be any good, or I want to know if it's going to run. And at the end of the day, they had no intention of paying for it to begin with. So do you think that kind of approach, in a way, almost encourages and opens the door for more abuse?
I think so for certain people, not for everyone. You obviously can't win if you're a developer because people will pirate your game. The best thing that you can do is make sure that people see you in a more human light. Like, oh yeah, we're really taking potential revenue away by pirating this. And if we do that, there might come a time where they don't have enough money to make another game.
Right. So if what you're looking at is implement DRM that's eventually going to be cracked, don't implement DRM and just say nothing about it, or don't implement DRM and go out there and market and try to get your good guy points. Like right now, the last option's the best one.
Just make people aware that there could be very serious consequences to you pirating their stuff.
And maybe next time when you release your next game, you'll hit them at a time where they have money in their bank account and they have disposable income. And they will like what you did previously and then this time spend money on your stuff. I mean, that's the ideal scenario. But I guess overall, there's just the realization that, hey, you're not going to be able to stop it. So how can you spin it the best way possible? And it's either that or it's release a whole lot of patches back to back to back and maybe try and stay ahead of the curve for a little bit longer. But eventually, that stuff is always going to get cracked and the pirates are always going to catch up to you. So I guess embrace it, right? I don't know. But that's tricky.
Which game did that? The one that just released a new patch every single day and the crackers just gave up after a while. Which game was that?
Oh, I don't. That's a hypothetical, to do it that fast.
No, it actually happened.
I'd have to look that one up. I'm not sure. But I know that if you're, that's part of the convenience that comes with Steam is you get a constantly updated product. I mean, at least me personally, I want to have the newest version of a game. So if I know there's a version that's above what I can pirate, that's going to drive me nuts. Even if it's something really small that has no impact on the game.
The way to solve this seems to be to make obtaining software legitimately easier than pirating it.
Yeah, of course. And you have to accept that you're going to have enthusiasts with no disposable income. You're going to have teenagers and people who are hard on their luck and a certain small amount of people who are just entitled jerks who could totally afford it but are going to download it for free anyway. But I guess the problem is that it's weird to just say...
Yeah, just accept it.
There's no DRM on this. Yeah, there's no DRM, pirate if you want to, whatever, it's cool, trying to get your good guy marketing points, but at the same time legitimizing and taking away the consequence of people who pirate in that manner.
Yeah.
What a strange position to be in.
And that's why I'm torn with CD Projekt Red, because they're a great company, and they show time and time again that they support their customers. They're very customer oriented. I remember when the enhanced edition of The Witcher 2 came out. One of the first things they did was release a free patch that included all the extra content for people that already owned the game. So they're a very consumer oriented company, but like you said, they have this mentality when it comes to piracy where it sounds bad to put it that way, but it's almost like they're just kind of laying back and taking it, and they're just like, well, if it's going to happen anyway.
And maybe we're all just sort of beginning to realize that if we don't buy this thing, we're not going to get more of this thing. I mean, you consider it in a strange way a form of charity, like buying a game that you could download for free somewhere, but you drop the $15 on it or the $60 on it because you want to support the developer.
Yeah, ensure future development.
Yeah, and that actually makes you feel less like a consumer and more like a participant.
Okay.
In some ways, which is kind of cool. That's maybe a slight positive that's come out of the piracy movement, is that you feel like a good person when you do buy games instead of that's the default.
I don't know, but I feel like it shouldn't be,
No, of course it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't feel good for doing the, what you're supposed to do. You're like, oh, hey, I paid for this. Good job. That's what you're supposed to do.
No, I mean, of course not. But that's just something I don't know where all this ends up because it's been in flux for the last 15 years, right?
Yeah.
And there's still no hard and fast rules for how you deal with piracy. That's bananas.
Yeah, like you have a bunch of companies that are, they're trying different approaches. I remember it's not necessarily piracy, it's more hacking, but Blizzard back in the day with Diablo 2, map hacks were a huge thing. And they kind of did a scorched earth, attack where they released a quote unquote, unofficial, a new map hack for the new version of Diablo 2, and everybody that downloaded it suddenly got banned overnight. And it's like, Jesus Christ, I mean, like, is that really the approach you want to take now? Because, I mean, you ultimately ended up pissing off a bunch of players.
Well, the players first pissed Blizzard off.
But in a place where image is so important, and watching that conflict between company image and people, both buyers and non-buyers, and how all those parties sort of interact with each other is kind of nuts that it hasn't settled into some process by now.
Yeah, because at one point, at one point it may start off as like the company's going against piracy, but eventually at some point, because the system's always in such flux, it's going to turn into the companies against the consumer, and it's going to keep going back and forth, and it's almost like there's no real middle ground between that.
I mean, do they think every time that they release a new game that they did it this time and this game is uncrackable?
Ubisoft seemed to think that a couple of years ago, and to their credit, it took hackers quite some time to hack that particular game. I think it was The Settlers or something like that. It took them quite some time to crack it, but they did crack it in the end.
Was it the CEO for Ubisoft that has some choice words about PC gamers in general, though?
Yeah,
where I think
they don't seem to like PC gamers very much.
I think
because of piracy.
Yeah, he just mentioned but again, that goes into the image thing. Like, you don't want to lump your whole potential customer base into that camp just because you have a personal issue with it.
Well, I can sort of get why. If all you see on the PC platform is revenue lost, that sort of skews your vision.
Well, especially from his standpoint, right?
Well, I'm kind of surprised Chris is being a little bit more lenient on this, because, I mean, I know as a musician, you probably had your fair share of, piracy issues.
Oh, yes. And I try to deal with that in a more scorched earth kind of way, like sending out DMCA claims and stuff like that. And that sort of works, but for every website that you take down, 15 others pop up. You can't stop it. So the only thing that you can do is make sure that the legitimate way is the most convenient way for the end user. And this won't stop until they start to enforce that ban on illegal downloads. But they won't do that because, again, people download en masse. There's no way to stop it.
Do you think there's a difference in the culture of piracy in, I guess, the entertainment industry and music and movies in comparison to the gaming industry?
I don't know. Like I said, downloading devalues a product. And we've come so far now. Like, people have been illegally downloading stuff for, 15 years now?
At least.
And the generation that is growing up now, they think that music, movies, and games are free because you can freely get them on the internet without ever paying for them. So I think what is needed is a shift in the way people are thinking about digital media. People need to realize that games, music, and movies, they're not free, and they should start paying for that. But how to make them see that? I don't know.
Do you think maybe that's just a side effect of the advent of the digital age? Because we're not going out and getting physical copies as much, and almost there's no tangible value to what you're holding now.
That value only gets decreased even more when people just flat out won't pay for the stuff that they want to consume.
I think to go back to what you were saying before, that video games are a little different, because when you pay for movies or TV, you're not really making a payment directly from your wallet to the pocket of the person who made it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, in video games, like publishers take a cut and Steam takes a cut and whatever, but it's not like subscribing to cable, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like, you feel closer to the actual person who's making the thing that you like. And so it's different. I don't know if that's good or bad, and I don't know where to take that, but it is very different as far as how many hands that money changes before it gets to the end developer.
Yeah, I do think that there's definitely like a more personal, I guess, touch in the gaming industry, like you said, because it feels, at least, it's more apparent that you're closer to the source of the game rather than like with a movie, like you said. You're not just facing some big, faceless studio. It's, it's CD Projekt Red, it's Ubisoft, it's Double Damage Games. These are actual studios with people, and I don't know, somehow it just feels easier to relate to them on a personal level.
Is that really true, though? Because I might know a couple of people who work at Ubisoft. I might know a couple of people who work at EA. But to me, and I think I think to most people, or even farther removed from the studios than we are, I think they still see them as faceless companies, and they can't really feel bad about ripping off something that has no humanity in their eyes.
Right.
I think it becomes harder to pirate stuff when you see that it's directly damaging an individual.
But I think that they have a larger degree of community contact, talking about how they made the things they made and what they did, and hey, we made these changes because of this. Like TV shows and stuff, who am I giving money to? Like my cable provider, and then they redistribute it amongst whatever they want to buy, I suppose. But they're not, like, there's no forum or blog where I can go and read about why this plot has gone in this direction or anything like that.
Right.
There's more communication there. Now, whether that humanizes them, you're probably right. At least for much larger companies like Ubisoft and EA, those are definitely the equivalent of a kind of faceless corporation. But once as you're going down that ladder of company size with video games, I think that you very quickly get to the point where they feel more human and they feel like smaller studios.
No, definitely. And like you said, I think it definitely, at least whether or not it's factually true, it does definitely give the perception that they are more humanized because you're so in contact with them. You have dev blogs, you have community, managers and all that stuff. You have almost a direct voice to these studios. And I mean, there's times when I've wanted to pirate something and just send the money directly to the developer, just because, hey, I don't like your publisher, but I love you guys as the developer.
So it's a strange situation. Like, the whole ecosystem just boggles my mind all the time. It's just, it has never changed. And you're right, it does come all down to service and convenience. And that's, I guess, the current purpose of DRM is just to make it a little more inconvenient to pirate. But it all gets cracked eventually.
Yeah, and like you said, you can make it more inconvenient to pirate, but at the same time, you're also doing it at the cost of inconveniencing the people that are paying for your product. And I feel that can almost open the doors for them to just say, fuck it, I don't want to deal with this, let me pirate this.
Yeah. Well, it's just that more often than not, it's legit players that suffer from DRM, while the pirates have a hassle-free experience.
And that's not right.
It isn't.
Like I said, it's as bad as it sounds. It's almost like we've reached a situation where we're just staring at the inevitability of it. It's going to happen. It is happening, and all that's left is, are these studios going to fight tooth and nail and make it as inconvenient as possible for everybody just to stick it to these particular group of people, or are they going to take a more benign approach and just say, hey, we're going to try to go with the flow and hopefully it works out in the end?
So the next topic I wanted to bring up for discussion, I don't have a good vocabulary word for it, but I'm sort of tentatively calling it learned behavior in video games. And sort of, I use that term to reflect on the fact there's things when we play video games that we just know because we've played a lot of them. Sort of becoming better at video games as a whole by playing lots of individual video games. Like the way you know where a specific hidden item might be, or when you're playing a platformer, you run left just to see what's on that screen over there instead of right. I was playing the Mario game on the Wii U, and me and my wife were looking for one of those stars, and I just jumped in a hole that basically looked like it would kill you because I felt like something would be down there, and she was like, how did you know that? And I was like, well, I didn't, but that's just kind of the way that this always works. And there's a few angles I think that we could take to approach it, one of them being sort of as you become better at this predictive nature, if that's what causes some people to burn out on video games. And another one with the sort of meta of game development and implementation and how you play that second guessing game where you put it there because people know it's there. But then again, you don't because everybody knows it's there because it's been done so many times.
I think these tropes are kind of handy because it means that we pick up most games without much trouble. Games being based in the same principles also makes it easier to focus on mechanics that are unique to the game that you're playing.
So you kind of go, Like every time you find something like that, you go, yeah, video games. I like these. Like they just sort of reinforce yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, you sort of know what to do. So it just becomes easier to pick games up. But it gets interesting when these tropes are subverted. We don't notice it when we automatically go left on a platformer because that's how we used to play 2D platformers. But we do notice it if we try to go right in instead of left and find a hidden area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting, I guess, just overall concept because you develop this predictive nature for things, and then things that maybe perhaps should be secret aren't as secret anymore. Or there's tropey things, like here's a quiet room with a lot of health pickups. Okay, I'm about to fight a boss.
Yeah.
Like these little things that you just sort of know and understand. People picking up games for the first time don't have that.
Have you guys ever heard of Eagle Raptor?
Yes.
Did you ever watch? I guess he did a video a while ago. Sequelitis talking about Mega Man and how it's
it's
paramount. It's basically one of the greatest games because it uses that learned behavior to teach you how to play the game. But the reason I bring that up is because just listen to your discussion. It's really interesting when you think about games that you've played that they don't explain these things and they're meant to be just common knowledge. Like, hey, double tap A, it's a double jump, or like you said, go right to progress through this area, or like the way there's a lot of enemies this direction obviously means I need to go this way, versus games that have a very in-depth tutorial that at times can almost feel frustrating. And it's just kind of interesting seeing that kind of dynamic that which games tend to rely on that innate knowledge people have versus games that just assume you're a blank slate.
Yeah, that's another one actually, now that you mention it. Like when you're playing maybe an RPG or an FPS and you go down one path, like you're at a fork in the road, you go down one side and you kind of say, I've kind of been going down here a little too long. I bet there was something if I went back there and went left.
Yeah, exactly. Or like, when you're playing those action RPGs like Diablo and you go and break every single barrel you can because, hey, there might be something in these barrels.
Which is something that we've learned from Zelda. I think.
And it's funny because it's tropes that I feel kind of like, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy where, we learned them. The developers playing the games have learned them from there, so they incorporate it into their games, and it's a cycle that keeps continuing on.
Yeah,
I think those things are still in games because they were always there. Mm-hmm. It just becomes easy to build your games on those tropes because that would just mean that people will get into it easier once they understand the specific number of things already. So now they can focus on the things that this game does differently.
Do you think that presents maybe some sort of a barrier of entry to video games as a whole, with games that aren't designed specifically to explain these concepts to people?
I don't necessarily think so, and maybe I'm just saying this because I'm biased, but I feel like a lot of these quote-unquote learned behaviors are just very, I guess, common sense, something that even a toddler could figure out by mashing on the controllers for a few minutes. Because think about it, when you get the controller in your hand and the game loads up, what's the first thing you do? It's just fiddle around, see what each button does. So I feel like as long as these games aren't trying to, I guess, overcomplicate what these learned behaviors are supposed to be, I don't think it really limits the barrier to entry. If anything, it could be more, it can actually help increase it, let people experiment around and feel like they're more invested in the game because they figure these things out themselves.
Yeah, that's true. And then for everybody else, they now have a platform, like they can assume that anybody coming to their game has this amount of knowledge and they can just build straight off that instead of building up to it and then off of it.
If too much of these tropes are in a game, it could also sort of ruin the immersion, I think. Make games feel too gamey, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely got a negative side to it too. I think that predictive nature can cause you to pick up a game and everything is the way that you assumed it would be, and then that's kind of boring. So you predictively assume the rest of the game is going to be like that, and then you're just like, okay, whatever, I'm bored. So it's a double-edged sword, but it's something that we're all doing, like as we continue to play more and more games, and I can't help but wonder if maybe, because you see a lot of people they say, oh, video games are boring now, I used to love them, now I don't. And I wonder if it's because they have internalized so many of these things that now they can mentally walk through the rest of the game without playing it because there's not as many surprises.
Huh.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, actually. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you just pick them up very slowly. That's why I wish I could have found like a vocabulary term or something to encapsulate it, but the more you play games, obviously, the more of these things you're going to pick up.
Yeah, the more experienced you become, the less you'll be surprised. Huh.
And
That's a very interesting point.
yeah, and so it's just video games, like as a whole, instead of like each individual game. And I don't know, as what you do as a developer, like, I guess in a way you have to be aware of that to subvert it, right?
I guess, what are some specific examples you can think of? I guess, maybe split by genre. Like you said, for the platformers, obviously, going right to progress.
Yeah, and you know that at certain points you can jump in a hole, and instead of dying, you're going to end up in a secret room.
Or like when you're walking around RPGs and you see that one wall that's a different shade.
Yeah.
Obviously, hey, that's something I can break, and there'll be a hidden secret behind it.
Yeah, it's like watching old episodes of Scooby-Doo, like where you see the door that's a different color than the rest of the background, and you go, boink, secret door. Right? Because you've seen it so many times that you know it and you understand it. And I mean, most recently this happened to me in Pillars of Eternity. When you go into that first dungeon, like you go right, and all of a sudden it's opening up into this huge cavern with these traps and stuff, and you're like, maybe I should go back and go left, and you do, and there's like a little campsite there with some items and stuff.
Right. It's funny because I feel like a lot of that learned behavior is really prevalent in RPGs because, like you said, you always get to that one area in the game where you're walking down a hallway and you're like, I've been going here for a while. Let me turn around and explore this side of the map because I might have missed something over there.
And you know that, and you're normally right. Like your confirmation bias gets pinged every single time when you're right. So in a way, like, that feels good. So they should put that stuff in, because every time it happens, you're like, oh, cool, I understand video games. Check me out. But if it happens too much, it becomes too predictive, and you kind of get bored in a way, because that surprise room isn't a surprise when you've seen it in 6 other games in that same location.
Right.
But overall, it's just a situation that I think needs some sort of awareness, because I couldn't find anything about it. And I think as video games become a medium, as we build out the lexicon of video games, we need to know what we can expect people to know when they sit down in front of one.
Well, it's sort of a cornerstone of game development, I think. Just building on the principles of your predecessors.
Mm-hmm.
Have you experienced a game that has maybe either broken away from that or used it in a very unorthodox way?
Normally when I see it, it's because it's almost a different genre, or they're doing something so completely different that it overrides that stuff. One Way Heroics on Steam was pretty good, because the screen it's like a roguelike, but the screen is constantly moving from left to right. So everything else about that game is essentially exactly what you would expect from a game like that, as far as combat and weapons upgrades and all that stuff. It's just that it stops itself from being something where you enter that predictive zone and go, okay, I know what the rest of this game is like, by just having one thing change and be radically different.
I'm trying to think, is like I can only recall it, I guess, being used almost satirically. Like Blood Dragon had a really funny way of doing it, where the controls to Blood Dragon, it was that old school 80s sci-fi synth parody. It was like the standalone expansion to Far Cry 3.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, the tutorial level, the controls are exactly the same as Far Cry 3, but they kind of throw that in there as a I guess, meta joke, where the commander you're with, activates a tutorial program, and your main character is just, complain the whole time because you have to, do these things that you should already know how to do.
That's pretty funny.
You've never played it?
If you haven't played it, it's actually really funny, because the whole thing is very tongue-in-cheek, so it doesn't take itself seriously at all. But it's funny because, like, you jump off the plane, and you have the AI voice saying, initiating tutorial, press A to jump. He's like, why are we doing this? And the whole time the guy's just raging because, these are things you should know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, kind of hard pressed to find, games that have actually, I don't know if we're reaching a point where they're relying too much on it, to the point, like you said, where it's just expected and we don't even give it a second thought.
I think so, because I can't really think of any examples.
I don't know, because I feel like it might be refreshing to see a game that, tries to turn this on its head.
Well, can you really do that, though? Without sacrificing the quality, because like I said, it's a bit of a cornerstone in game development to build on these principles.
I think you definitely could, because you can still use the principles, but just change the expectation of them. Because like right now we know on a platformer, go right to proceed. You could throw in a gaming mechanic that completely flips that on its head. It's like playing, what is it, Symphony of the Night, where you beat the game once and suddenly the castle's upside down, and suddenly what was up was down, and you have to kind of re-figure out the map in your head.
Right.
Or looking at it in a tongue-in-cheek kind of satirical manner. I mean, I guess it's good for a laugh from that sort of standpoint, but it's troubling in another way, because these learned behaviors quickly become best practices. because then you're making things because they've always been made that way. And when you're approaching your level design and you're trying to decide where to put the secret, and your little flip book in your head of all the secrets you've ever seen goes flipping around, you're going to put it something similar to one of those.
I personally don't really think that is a bad thing.
No, but I see what Sam's saying, because it does kind of run the danger of eventually reaching a point where these learned behaviors just start stagnating. And, you reach the area where he mentioned where you just eventually get to a point where you get bored because you've seen these things before. You pick up a game and suddenly you realize you know where every single corner is, you know where every hidden chest is, just because, oh, hey, it's behind this fake wall. Oh, hey, let me jump in. Oh, hey, okay, this is exactly what I expected. And you kind of, I don't know, I feel like your interest or the novelty of it tapers off a bit.
Isn't this the reason why most developers advertise unique mechanics in their games? Because those are the things that make them stand out and make them interesting to play.
Yeah, it's got to be.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, you can use those learned behaviors as a backdrop to, make your unique mechanic stand out
even more. And it does make you feel like you understand video games when something is where you expect it to be. But it's also could be boring. That's the crux, I guess, of the issue for me.
Yeah, I guess I'm just now that Sam has pointed it out and you're made aware of it, I'm kind of thinking, it'd be really refreshing to see a game that makes you challenge, these convictions. Okay, actually, BioShock, and I mean, spoilers, just in case somebody hasn't played BioShock 1, but when you get to the realization of, Andrew Ryan saying, revealing what you kindly means, it's really interesting because it's a perfect example of going against that, because up to that point, every game, you have this voice giving you missions. The learned behavior you have in games is, hey, this is my quest, let me go do it. And you never once stop for a second to think if you have a choice. And when he reveals that twist of, would you kindly, and I guess the concept that the character himself never had the choice of doing it, it kind of gave you this blow to your mind thinking, this whole time, I've just been playing this as a game, following, the missions because that's what you do in a game. And suddenly I don't know, it did a really cool twist to the story of it.
Yeah.
And I felt like it manipulated that concept of learned behavior really well.
Yeah, it sort of takes away what you expected to be player agency.
Yeah, you were never really in control in the first place.
Yeah, but I mean, and like I said, it's that concept that you're playing a game, and NPC tells you to go do a quest. You do it because that's what you do in a game. So I don't know. I feel like it's now that it's something that we're made aware of. I feel like it's something that developers could really tap into to kind of take our experiences to the next level.
And that concludes episode 4. We hoped you liked it and that we gave you something to think about. For more information, you can check the show notes for links to our various social media pages. If you want to join in on the discussion, you can go to the True Gaming subreddit over at reddit.com/r/True Gaming, and you can leave your thoughts on any of the topics discussed in today's episode in the relevant episode thread. If you have ideas for topics, or if you want to ask us a question, you can submit your questions at ask.fm/select characters. As always, we would like to thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to us on iTunes via RSS feed or on YouTube to get the new episode delivered right to your inbox every Wednesday. We've been Select Characters, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Take it easy.
Goodbye.